Ethan stood in the middle of the cold, steel room, his hands shaking uncontrollably. His heart raced as his eyes darted from one sister to the other. Both were locked in separate, transparent cages, their faces a mix of fear and desperation. The aliens around him stood still, their glowing eyes fixed on him, waiting for his decision. The alien judge, tall and imposing, spoke in a language that was strange yet somehow understood by Ethan. "Pick one sister, human." The judge's voice echoed in the room, cold and unforgiving. "The other will be put to death now." Ethan's body went numb. The words felt like a punch to his gut. His mind struggled to process the demand. Leah, the older sister, had always been the protector. She was strong, fierce, and ready to fight anyone who threatened them. Mara, the younger sister, was gentle and kind, always looking for peace in every situation. The two sisters were everything to him. He loved them both in different ways, and now he had to choose which one would live and which one would die. The aliens seemed to take pleasure in his suffering. They watched with cold detachment as Ethan's heart tore in two. The judge's eyes narrowed, and with a slow, deliberate motion, he raised a hand. A soft hum filled the air as a countdown began to play on a large screen above the room. Each passing second felt like an eternity. Ethan's breath came faster, his mind spinning. He glanced at Leah, who was standing tall in her cage, her jaw clenched, ready for anything. She had always been the fighter, the one who would never back down, even when the odds were stacked against them. But she was also the one who had pushed Ethan to be strong, to survive in the face of impossible odds. Then, his eyes shifted to Mara. The younger sister had always been the light in their family, the one who brought laughter and warmth even in the darkest times. She was the one who had always been there to comfort him after a rough day, the one who had held his hand when their world seemed to be falling apart. To choose between them felt impossible. His heart was breaking as he realized what the aliens were forcing him to do. The countdown continued to tick down, each second hammering at his mind, adding more pressure, more weight to the decision. He thought about what his parents would have wanted. They had always taught them to care for one another, to put family above all else. And now, here he was, standing in front of two people he loved more than anything, and he had to pick which one would live. "Choose now," the alien judge repeated, his voice growing louder, more insistent. Ethan felt a wave of guilt and fear flood over him. His chest tightened, his breath shallow. He wanted to scream, to shout at the aliens to stop, but he knew it was no use. He was trapped in a nightmare with no escape. The clock was ticking. Every second brought him closer to making a decision that would haunt him forever. His eyes flickered back to Leah, then to Mara. He couldn't do it. How could he choose between the two people who meant everything to him? The judge's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Choose now, or both will die." Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He could feel the sweat dripping down his neck, his mind racing. The impossible decision was upon him. The fate of his sisters, his family, rested on him, and he didn't know how much longer he could stand the weight of it. Ethan's mind raced, but it felt like time had stopped. The pressure of the moment weighed him down, his thoughts scattered like fragments of broken glass. He looked at Leah, her eyes fierce with defiance, yet even in her strength, he saw the same fear that gripped him. His sister, the one who had always been the shield, the one who fought for their survival, was now as vulnerable as anyone else in this terrifying place. The cage she was in seemed like a fragile barrier against the alien world around them, a world that now held their fate in its hands. And then his gaze shifted to Mara. The younger sister's eyes were filled with pleading, a silent cry for mercy that made his chest tighten. She was everything soft and pure in his life. He remembered the days when they would laugh together, when Mara would sit by the fire, humming a soft melody. Those moments of joy now felt like a lifetime ago. How could he choose between them? How could he decide who would live and who would die? He had no answers. He was lost in the face of impossible odds. The countdown ticked louder in his ears, reminding him with every passing second that time was slipping away. He was not just making a decision for his sisters. He was making a choice that could end everything they had ever known. Could he live with the consequences? Could he ever forgive himself if he chose wrong? The alien judge stood silently, his eyes unwavering, as if waiting for Ethan's next move. The aliens surrounding him seemed to breathe in unison, their eyes glowing with a sense of cold satisfaction. They were enjoying this, savoring his pain. Ethan could see the faint smirk on the judge's face. This was no test of right or wrong, it was a game. A sick, twisted game designed to break him. To see how far he would go to protect his family. A voice echoed in his mind. His father's voice, reminding him of the lessons he had taught them, family above all else. But what did that mean in a world like this? Was he supposed to choose who deserved to live? Was it even his right to make such a decision? He turned back to Leah, then to Mara, trying to read their faces, looking for some kind of clue, some hint that might make the decision easier. But there was nothing. Both sisters looked back at him with the same silent "please save us." The seconds continued to slip away. Ethan could feel his hands shaking, his legs growing weak beneath him. His stomach twisted in knots. Every instinct told him to find a way out of this, to fight, to rebel. But the cold reality of their situation settled in. He was alone. There was no escape, no way to turn back. Finally, he raised his head, his eyes meeting the judge's once more. "I can't choose," he whispered, barely able to make the words come out. "I can't choose between them." The judge's expression did not change. The alien's voice echoed in the room, cutting through Ethan's heart. "Then you will lose both." The words were final, unyielding. Ethan felt a sharp pain in his chest, the weight of his indecision crushing him. He could feel the walls closing in, suffocating him. As the countdown ticked down to its final seconds, a wave of realization hit him. There was no easy choice here, no right decision, just the burden of a choice he never should have had to make. The seconds seemed to stretch on forever, each one heavier than the last. Ethan's heart pounded, the sound deafening in his ears. He felt like he was drowning in an ocean of guilt, confusion, and pain. The cold metal of the alien room pressed against him, the walls closing in, making the air feel thick and suffocating. Every breath he took was labored, every heartbeat a reminder of the impossible decision before him. His eyes flicked between Leah and Mara, but both sisters were as trapped as he was. Their faces mirrors of the torment he felt inside. He could feel their eyes on him. But they weren't angry. There was no accusation in their gazes, only silent pleading. Leah, always the strong one, stood frozen in her cage, her expression unreadable. Her fists clenched as if preparing for the worst. She had always been the one to fight back, to protect them both, but now she was helpless, just as vulnerable as Mara. His mind struggled with the weight of it all. How could he make this choice? How could he possibly choose one life over the other? The room felt colder as the alien judge's gaze intensified. The silence between them felt suffocating, stretching out like a wound that had yet to be fully exposed. Ethan's fingers twitched at his sides, his body caught in the battle between action and indecision. The judge spoke again, his voice cutting through the silence with a finality that made Ethan's stomach twist. "The time is almost gone, human. You must decide." Ethan clenched his fists, trying to calm his racing thoughts, but they kept circling back to one painful truth. There was no right answer. If he chose Leah, he would lose Mara, the sister who had always been his emotional anchor. But if he chose Mara, he would lose Leah, the one who had always been his protector, his fighter. The pain of the choice was too much to bear. Suddenly, a strange sensation washed over him. It wasn't physical, but mental, a whisper, faint but persistent, like a voice in his head that wasn't his own. It wasn't the voice of the aliens or the judge, but something more familiar. Leah. He remembered the conversations they had as children, the way she would always tell him to stay strong no matter what. She had always been the one to give him courage. "You know what to do," the voice whispered again, this time louder. "You've always known." Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him like a tidal wave. It wasn't about choosing the right sister or the one who had more to offer. This was about survival. It was about making the decision that would give them both a chance to live, a chance to fight back against the alien captors. His eyes snapped to Mara, the sister who had always been the light in his life. She had never asked for this, never asked to be caught in the middle of a war. That wasn't hers to fight, but she was here, just as much a part of this as anyone. Ethan knew in that moment that he couldn't let her die, not without giving her the chance to survive, to have a life beyond this nightmare. With a trembling hand, Ethan stepped forward, his voice barely a whisper. "I choose Mara." The words felt like a dagger to his heart, but they were the only words that could free them both. He turned his eyes to Leah, his chest tight with the pain of knowing he had chosen the wrong sister, the one who had fought so hard to keep them safe. But as the decision settled within him, he knew it was the only way forward. There was no other choice. The alien judge's expression remained unreadable as the decision was made. But Ethan felt a sense of finality. There would be no turning back now. Ethan stood frozen, the words hanging in the air like a dense fog. "I choose Mara." His voice felt foreign, as though it wasn't even his own. But it was the only thing he could say. The weight of the decision crushed him, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Every fiber of his being screamed that he had just sentenced his sister to death, but in his heart, he knew it was the only choice he could make. Leah, the fierce warrior who had always protected him, stood there in her cage. Her eyes locked onto his with an expression that sent a shiver through his spine. But Ethan couldn't look at her anymore. He couldn't bear the guilt, the crushing sense of loss that seemed to swallow him whole. He turned his eyes back to Mara, her gaze filled with something he couldn't quite place: hope, fear, love. She was the younger one, always the one who brought light into his life, always the one who had believed that there was a way out. And now he was going to save her, to give her a chance at life, while sacrificing the one who had fought so hard to keep them alive. The alien judge's voice broke through the silence, cold and emotionless as ever. "So be it." With a sharp wave of his hand, the force field around Mara's cage dissolved, and she stepped out, but not without a heavy cost. The judge's words echoed in Ethan's mind, reverberating through the room. One sister lives, the other dies. As the countdown continued, Ethan's heart twisted in a way he couldn't explain. Was this justice? Was this sacrifice? Or was it just a cruel game of a twisted, higher power? Before he could process it further, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper reached his ears. "Ethan." The voice was faint, but familiar. His body went rigid. It was Leah. She was still in her cage, her face a mask of anguish and resolve. "I know you had no choice, but you have to be strong. You're not alone in this." Her voice held no anger, no bitterness, only a deep, quiet understanding. It made his chest tighten even more. Tears welled up in his eyes as he turned toward Leah. But she wasn't looking at him with hate, as he had expected. Instead, her eyes were filled with a strange, painful serenity, a woman's wisdom far beyond her years. She had always been the protector, the one who led, the one who fought. And now she was going to die for their survival, for Mara's survival. His throat closed as he struggled to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to break free. But deep down, he knew that the decision had been made, and there was no going back. Mara had been given a chance, and with that, Ethan had done what was necessary. It wasn't right. It wasn't just. But it was the only way forward. As Mara walked past him, her head held high, there was a brief, silent exchange between the two of them, one filled with sorrow and gratitude. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. "Thank you." It was all she needed to say. Ethan could only nod, unable to find the words to explain how sorry he was for what he had done. The judge stepped forward once again, his expression still unreadable. "It is done," he said. And just like that, the moment of choice was over. But the consequences, the guilt, the loss, and the crushing sense of finality had only just begun to settle in. Ethan stood in the silence that followed the judge's words, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. His world seemed to hang in limbo, suspended between the choice he had made and the reality that was beginning to set in. He turned to look at Leah, who was still trapped in her cage. There was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet acceptance. Her face remained calm, but Ethan could see the subtle tremor in her hands as she clenched them into fists. She was holding it together for him, for Mara, but Ethan knew that this would change everything. Mara was free, yes, but at what cost? His thoughts swirled in a storm of guilt and confusion, each one more overwhelming than the last. He had made the only choice he could, but it had shattered him. The weight of knowing that Leah, his protector, would die in his place felt like a lead weight on his chest, suffocating him. He had lost one sister and saved the other, but it didn't feel like a victory. He didn't feel like a hero. The silence in the room grew louder, each passing moment echoing in his ears like a death knell. His heart thudded in his chest, each beat slower than the last. Leah was still staring at him, her eyes not filled with hatred, but with something else, something almost impossible to read. Ethan could feel the tears welling up in his eyes again, but he refused to let them fall. He was supposed to be strong. He was supposed to be their leader, their protector. But now, with Mara safe and Leah facing her fate, Ethan felt small and helpless. And then, as if sensing his struggle, Leah spoke, her voice low and steady. "You did what you had to do." Her words were simple, but they hit him like a punch to the gut. She didn't blame him. How could she not? He had chosen one of them to live and sentenced the other to death. But Leah, strong, fierce Leah, was not angry. She was never angry with him. She had always known that in this world, there were no easy choices, only sacrifices. "I wish there was another way," Ethan whispered, the words choking him. "I know," Leah replied quietly, "but there isn't, and you're not alone in this. I made my peace with it long ago." Her words were both a comfort and a curse. Ethan could feel the sharp sting of regret cutting through him, but at the same time, he felt the weight of Leah's trust, her quiet strength. She was accepting her fate with dignity, something Ethan didn't know if he would ever be able to do. How could he accept the death of his sister? How could he live with himself knowing that he had made the decision to sacrifice her for Mara? Before Ethan could respond, the alien judge's voice echoed through the room again, cold and final. "Time is up. The deal is sealed." Ethan looked up, his gaze meeting the alien's. There was no satisfaction in the judge's expression, just a chilling indifference. The aliens were not concerned with the emotions of their prisoners, nor did they care about the lives they had just manipulated. To them, this was just another game, a cruel, heartless game. But to Ethan, it was his family's life, his heart and soul torn apart by an impossible choice. The door to the room suddenly opened, and a group of alien soldiers stepped forward. Mara was ushered out of the cage, her eyes briefly meeting Ethan's before she was escorted away. There was no joy in her face, no celebration, only quiet sadness. Ethan knew that she wasn't free, not really. How could she be? Not when her sister's life had been the price of her survival. As the soldiers moved towards Leah, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The finality of the moment was setting in. This was it. Leah was going to die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He wanted to scream, to fight, to throw himself at the aliens and beg them for mercy. But he knew that it was pointless. He was powerless in this cold, alien world. Leah turned to him one last time, a small, sad smile on her lips. "Don't carry this burden alone," she said softly. "Live, Ethan, live for both of us." And then, as the soldiers began to drag her away, her face disappeared from view, and Ethan felt a hollow emptiness fill the space inside him. He could still hear the echo of her voice in his mind, but it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough to undo the damage he had done. He was alone now, truly alone. The weight of his decision crashed down on him with a force that almost brought him to his knees. But in the end, there was nothing left to do but live with it. Leah's sacrifice was final, and all Ethan could do now was try to make sure that Mara didn't die. Too, he had chosen her. He had saved her. And now he had to ensure that the pain of this choice was not in vain. As the room fell silent again, Ethan took a deep breath. There was nothing left to do but face the future and carry the weight of his sister's death with him for the rest of his life. Ethan's mind was a blur of confusion and grief. Leah's face was burned into his memory, the image of her sacrifice a constant reminder of the unbearable weight he now carried. He had made the choice, and yet it didn't feel like a choice at all. It felt like a betrayal. The universe had torn his world apart, and there was no way to piece it back together. The cold, metallic walls of the alien ship seemed to close in on him, their suffocating presence a reflection of his inner turmoil. He walked aimlessly through the sterile halls, each step heavier than the last. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, dragging him toward some unknown end. What now? What did he do with a life that had been shattered so completely? His thoughts turned to Mara, the one he had chosen to save. She had been led away by the soldiers, but he hadn't been able to look at her, not really. He couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. He had saved her, yes, but at such a cost. Could she ever forgive him? Could he ever forgive himself? His heart ached as he remembered the look on her face, the silent gratitude, yes, but also the underlying sorrow. She knew, just as he did, that there was no joy in survival when it came at the expense of another. And Leah. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut against the pain, wishing he could somehow undo it all. But he knew there was no going back. The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie. He turned sharply, his body tensing as he prepared for whatever alien force might approach. But it wasn't the soldiers. It was Mara. She stood at the end of the hallway, her expression a mixture of sadness and determination. She had changed. Her posture was different, straighter, like someone who had seen too much of the world's darkness. Her eyes were still filled with a hint of fear, but beneath it was something stronger, resolve. She had been through hell and back, but now, she was no longer the same girl who had been trapped in that cage. Mara, Ethan whispered, his voice raw. She took a step toward him, her eyes never leaving his. You saved me, she said softly. But at what cost? Her words cut through him like a blade, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. How could he possibly explain what he had done? How could he tell her that he had torn his own soul apart just to make sure she lived? Mara, he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. I know, Ethan, she said quietly. I know you did what you had to do. I know you didn't want this. But that doesn't mean it's easy. It's not just for you, it's for both of us. We carry this burden now, together. Her words settled over him like a warm blanket, easing some of the tension in his chest. But it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed a way to make it right, a way to honor Leah's sacrifice. But there was no answer. He had no magic solution, no grand way to fix the broken pieces of his life. All he had was the truth, and the truth was that he had failed. Mara, he said, his voice trembling, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can live with the choice I made. Mara's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her presence comforting yet heartbreaking. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. You have to, she said simply. You don't have a choice now. We both carry this loss, but we also carry the strength to move forward. For Leah, Ethan stared at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, just a flicker, a faint light at the end of a long tunnel, but it was something. He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. For Leah, the decision, the pain, the loss, it would never go away. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to honor her memory. Maybe with Mara by his side, they could find a way to make this right, to rebuild what had been broken. Maybe they could start by living, by carrying forward the legacy of the sister they had both lost. With a deep breath, Ethan turned toward the hallway again, his eyes filled with a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let Leah's sacrifice be in vain. Together, they would find a way to survive this, to live for the family they had lost and the future they still had to fight for. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk. Ethan and Mara walked side by side, their footsteps echoing in the quiet hallways of the alien ship. The weight of the past few hours still hung heavily over them, but now there was a strange, almost reluctant sense of determination in Ethan's step. He had made the choice, and it had shattered him. But now, he had to face the consequences, not just for Leah's sake, but for his own survival. He couldn't afford to fall apart, not now. As they moved forward, the air around them seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. The ship was vast, its alien architecture strange and cold. But Ethan's mind was far from the sterile walls and high-tech corridors. He couldn't stop thinking about Leah, her face, her final words. Live, Ethan, live for both of us. Those words rang in his ears, a constant reminder of the promise he had made to his sister, Mara. He finally spoke, his voice soft but steady. What happens now? Mara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. She had been so silent since they had left the cages, and Ethan wasn't sure if it was because of the guilt she shared with him or because she had no idea what their next step would be. Either way, they were both in the same boat now, lost in a galaxy full of hostile forces, carrying the weight of a decision that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. I don't know, she replied quietly, but we can't stay here forever, Ethan. We need to get out. We need to fight back. Her words, though simple, stirred something inside him, a burning need to make things right. He had been thinking about how to escape, about how to save Leah from this twisted fate. But how? How could they, to human survivors, hope to stand against the force that had so easily taken everything from them? Mara seemed to sense his hesitation, her gaze turning sharp as she studied his face. "We don't have all the time in the world," she said, the urgency clear in her voice. "The aliens will come for us eventually. We have to make a choice. We can either die here waiting, or we can fight back, take what's ours." The fire in her eyes mirrored the fierce spirit that Leah had always shown. Ethan felt a flicker of hope ignite inside him, a flame that, despite the devastation he'd just endured, refused to be extinguished. Leah had given him her strength, and now it was time for him to use it. "We fight," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "We fight for her, for Leah. We fight for all the others who've been trapped by these monsters." Mara nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She understood. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for a future, for a purpose. The aliens had taken Leah, but they couldn't take their will to resist. The realization struck him with sudden clarity. There was no turning back. The universe was unforgiving, cruel even, but it also left room for defiance, for those who dared to rise up against its tyranny. And now, he and Mara would be those people. They would fight back. They would take control of their fate. But how? The ship was massive, filled with alien technology and armed guards who could wipe them out in an instant. Ethan knew they couldn't do it alone. They would need allies, others who had been enslaved by these cold-hearted beings, those who had nothing left to lose. They would rise up together. They turned a corner, and ahead of them, a large door slid open, revealing a control room brimming with alien technology. The room was silent, empty for the moment, but Ethan could feel the presence of someone watching. He stepped inside cautiously, scanning the room, his heart pounding with anticipation. "We have to find a way to use their tech," Ethan muttered, more to himself than to Mara. "We can't just fight blindly." Mara stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. "We'll figure it out, together." And in that moment, Ethan realized that the road ahead would not be easy. But he wasn't alone anymore. With Mara at his side, they had a chance, no matter how slim it seemed. The galaxy was vast, but their will was stronger. They would fight back. They would make sure Leah's sacrifice meant something. They had no idea what they would face in the coming days, but they knew this: they would never let the aliens win. Not after what they had done. Not after the impossible choice Ethan had been forced to make. As the door to the control room shut behind them, sealing them into the unknown, Ethan's resolve hardened. There was no turning back now. For Leah, for the countless others trapped in this war, and for the future they were about to fight for. The battle for their freedom had only just begun.